Can you hear me okay?
I got you. You got me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know what that was. It was just some kind of glitch with the link. Looks like, so I just made another one. But hey, thanks for coming on again.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
It's Michael. I guess I never did catch your name last time.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I ever said it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, the intros. So, all right. Well, we are going to debate the topic. We'll get some people watching this. Should be an interesting one. It's the individual's right of freedom of speech is unlimited in its content related to speech. And again, I was kind of trying to be specific on speech here. And should never be limited in any way by government. So I'll go ahead and open.
Sure.
Government's role is to protect the individual's rights, not to determine what can and cannot be said by the individual. When we're talking about freedom of speech, again, we're very much specifically talking about with respect to what the government has a legitimate right to restrict, right? And so we're not talking about like, oh, I ran into my boss's office and I screamed and yelled at him and I went back to my desk and he said, I'm fired. I don't understand it. Free speech. Well, no. Right. So although there are cases where people have complained about their boss, the government, and been fired and taken it to the Supreme Court, and it's been ruled that because they were making a complaint about the government, just happened to be their boss, that they got their job back. So there's like teachers and things like that. So the First Amendment recognizes the individual's right, and these are amendments that recognize a pre-existing right, and they are meant to protect the individual's right from an oppressive government or from any kind of government restricting in any way the individual's right to do, in that case, practice a religion, speech, association, expression, things like that. The freedom of speech goes back in history back to, I have some links here. I forgot to bring them up. But it's the idea of a freedom of expression, right? That the individual has the right to express themselves as they wish, and the government has no legitimate right to come in and try to restrict how they express themselves. So I'll go ahead and get a nice little opening anyways. If you want to do your own little opening, or you there? Uh-oh. You dropped off. I'll give you a minute to come back on. So hopefully he comes back on. Oh, I think I heard something.
Okay.
Oh, you back?
Okay. Yeah, I got you now. I was you were
okay.
Around.
Your screen's blank.
I don't know if that was mine.
Okay.
I can see you.
It's getting a blank screen. So I was going to pass it over to you and see if you wanted to open yourself.
Sure. I just had some points of clarification. I may have missed it. I missed the last few, maybe last 30 seconds or so, what you were saying. Now, when you said, when you're arguing for freedom of speech, do you mean all forms of speech? I mean, it seems to me that there are forms of speech that are clearly recognized as being restricted, such as hate speech, such as inciting to violence, making threats. Are you saying that those types of freedom of speech are also unlimited? Just some clarification before I move on.
Yes, basically. I mean, this really, the kind of the purpose of posting this is actually specifically meant at the idea of hate speech, that the most important speech to protect is so-called hate speech.
Interesting. Now, of course, I disagree with that, and I disagree with that on several grounds. But the main point, the one I'll start with, is if you believe that the government has the ability and the responsibility to limit how an individual reacts to certain types of speech, such as hate speech, then it seems to me that you are admitting that you must accept the government is both the ability and the responsibility to limit free speech.
No, not at all. Because I think individuals, like if I come up to you and say, I think you're a real SOB, and you turn and you clock me, just because you don't like what I said, you don't have a right to aggress physically against me, but I have a right to say certain things. Now, if we got into a fight, that not necessarily, I mean, the government doesn't have a right to just come in and arbitrarily take one of us off to prison or something. It's like only if I say, hey, he aggressed against me, so then I have the physical aggression that you took against me, I would have a right to take you somewhere.
Why is it that you think that the government should come in and say stop that person from clocking you? What is the government protecting?
Well, what do you mean by stop that person?
Or punish them after the act is done, or regulate whether or not that should happen. It seems to me that what you're protecting there is yourself. The government is protecting you from injury. Would you agree that that's the government's responsibility, is to look out for the well-being of the government?
I would not say well-being of the government. I would say the government's right, or the government's legitimate job is to protect the natural rights of its citizens, right? So life, liberty, and property. So if you come after me and you start harming me, then you're harming my property, and I think government has a legitimate role in protecting my property. Just like if I came in and I spray painted your house, we have a legitimate beef that we can take. You should be able to take me off the court, some arbitrary, objective court system.
All right. But we do establish that then the actual punching of you would bring about some harm to you. Is that correct? And the government is then protecting you and preventing you from coming to harm through its regulation or its punishment, and the punishment then being preventative.
In some way, we could say that is an objective fact that you have harmed me, right? You've knocked my tooth out. You've, bloodied me in some form.
So it seems to me then that you're making the argument that speech in no way can cause objective harm to an individual.
I think speech, I can say one thing to you and one thing to some guy standing next to you, and they're not going to have the same effect, right? So I think when government comes along and says, well, we're gonna protect certain people from having their feelings hurt or something like that, then I think it's kind of a.
When you say though that they will have different effect between one individual and another, you are recognizing that the words themselves do have an effect, just like the fist to the bridge of your nose has an effect. So you're not denying that the words themselves can have some sort of effect upon a person. They can bring about, I would say, harm in one way or another. Possibility.
I would say yes, words can harm certain people, but not in an objective way.
Okay. Could you clarify what you mean words cannot harm people in an
let's think
way?
of a situation that I would go up to somebody and say something to them that would hurt their feelings or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be said, right, that would hurt people's feelings. And if we get into restricting some manner of so-called hate speech, actually, I was going to say, I forgot to say in the opening, really hate speech is the only speech there is that needs to be protected, right? That's the only speech that matters, because, nobody cares about love speech. You get up and you praise somebody and they're not going to say, oh, you're a terrible guy, stop that, right? So when we say objective, then
okay,
it's like, you could even get into, would a reasonable person be harmed? But I think even then you're talking about a subjective viewpoint, whereas a broken nose is a broken nose.
So do you deny that certain statements or patterns of speech towards, say, children are known to bring about harm? And we call it verbal abuse for a reason. It's abuse that is through the verbs, I guess, through the use of speech.
Well, yeah, I could see that it would cause them. I think not going up to them, a stranger going up saying one thing, I don't think that's going to cause any significant amount of harm, or really any true harm at all. But so you have kids, I think, right? Yeah.
All right. Can you hear me now?
You hear me now? Can you hear me? Testing. Testing. A, B, C, D, E. I hear you. Well, so anyways, I was going to say the First Amendment recognizes the individual's right, as I said, to and what government cannot do to the individual. Historically, in the United States, I could go into the history of the Alien and Sedition Act, which is the first aggression. I mentioned hate speech as being the only, just let me know when you can hear me. Hate speech is the only kind of speech that needs to be protected, because nobody cares about when I come up and compliment somebody. But it's a big problem, the idea that hate speech needs to be prevented, because we're talking about what is hate speech? I don't know. Just something that hurts somebody's feelings? Well, everything could hurt somebody's feelings. So we're really going to get into restricting all speech altogether. Along these lines, so getting a little outside of the specifics that we were just talking about, the idea of freedom of expression and a limit on individual speech is a limit on individuals' thoughts. So if the government comes in and says what you can and cannot say, they are actually saying what you can and cannot do. And this actually happened in the Soviet Union and in a lot of communist countries. They have thought crimes. So if anybody's read 1984, the thought crime, they had the thought police. It's a way to control the population to the way that the population thinks. So according to FIRE, that's free speech in individual rights in education, I think, I forget the name, FIRE.org, I believe. 54% of public, 59% of private colleges have free speech codes, or speech codes. They have no free speech. They have speech codes. There's been a number of examples of craziness. Constitution was handed out on Constitution Day, and they were not allowed to do that on one campus. On another campus, a individual, I think it was handed out, I forget to write it, but FIRE talks about this. So they have free speech zones. They were not allowed to conduct themselves in any kind of speech outside of a little 3x3 corridor type thing. Well, actually, it was about, I think, 2% of the campus. So looks like Michael's having some issues. We were having a little bit of issues in the platform itself in the beginning. The previous link wasn't working. Had about half an hour left. So as I was going to talk about the history of the U.S., of free speech in the U.S. Before the revolution, I didn't look into that too much, honestly, but I think it is interesting that there were limits on what you can say. I know in England, there's a corner in Green Park. Was it Green Park or Hyde Park? It's the big park in the middle of London. And it's a free speech zone. There's a little corner in there, and you can say whatever you want, except you're not allowed to incite violence. You're not allowed to insult the Queen, and you are not allowed to do one other thing. And I don't recall what it was, but it was on a tour I did. He was telling us that. So obviously, inciting violence is actually considered legal in the United States. It's just, is it immediate? It depends on the severity, the legitimacy of your claim, and the immediacy of the reaction of whether or not it's actually you have a gun and you're saying to a bunch of people with guns, let's fire on that house. That's inciting to violence. That's illegal. But if you're just walking around, you're a commie saying, hey, we should rise up against the government, that's legal. They protect that kind of speech, as ridiculous as it may be. But there's a lot of other instances where people that we all disagree with are out there marching and they're conducting themselves in their free speech rights. It says he's still going, so I have to see if he's still on here. No, haven't heard from him yet. So I'm going to go a little bit and see if he is able to jump back on. So anyway, I was talking about history in the U.S. The First Amendment to the United States, obviously from the Bill of Rights, is considered an individual's right, and it was amended to the Constitution, the Constitution signed in 1789. I think it was first brought in 1787, I believe. And it's that the freedom of speech shall not be abridged. So the right of the individual to speak against the government, to petition the government. And it comes from the idea of the freedom of expression. It was first attacked by John Adams. So he was the second president of the United States with the Alien and Seditions Act, which shows even though he was he was among the people that signed in the First Amendment to the Constitution, that signed the document, I believe he still, shows how flawed man is, that he still signed an act that severely restricted speech. People made minor insults of the president and they were imprisoned. And Virginia actually threatened to secede, but luckily Thomas Jefferson was elected the third president of the United States, and he pardoned all of the people that were imprisoned for that. You have periods of wartime imprisonment under martial law. Usually the government says that it has the right to restrict your rights and hold off, suspend the Constitution. I mentioned the teacher fired for criticizing the government, criticized his own employee. The employer happened to be the government, and so he took it to the Supreme Court and he got his job back. I think we might be about done here. Maybe we'll try again. See what he says.